Työläst pukide ja spässek kollepet polvamu, tiitse, mainstet tiit. Mulen vamstoa mä sähkövuoro, kun pirremoni tiemmän kujes tät liian, mutta kuitenkin maista sinä äsket pirretään manga mitchishap sinä jelkovit. Good morning to everyone and warmly thank you for having me here. I have prepared a small speech and then I will show a short video clip and maybe afterwards, I don't know if you want to ask me something, but I would rather have a short discussive moment with you if that would be okay. And I would like to congratulate the organizers for hosting such a beautiful and meaningful event. Whether this world was born out of the egg of a bluebill, the magnificent waterfall, or Big Bang, it was the name Skavasualle or Skaddesualle my people's ancestors gave her. Skav or Skad, depending on which school of thought of the Skoldsami language you prefer, the meaning of the word Skad or Skav we do not know any longer, but Sualle means an island. And the logical question that follows is what then surrounds the island and what is the shore we are looking the sky from? The peoples from the Turtle Islands might have their own answers to that question. My people's ancestors perceived the genders of different waters based on the ability or inability to act as cradles of life, to spawn. In this Skav or Skad island, always paying special attention to water, the element connecting us to the spheres above us, identifying the male and the female lakes, rivers, and ponds. And the name of the foremother, the grandmother of all waters, was given to the sea, where all life has been created. Till this day, I have not heard or read from any written materials studying the heritage of my people a creation story for a human being. Obviously, this doesn't necessarily mean that there is no such. Maybe I have just been sloppy in my research. But it could also mean that there is no creation story for a human being created yet. And so in our endemic world, there is no separate human being yet. And this is an explanation that my body knowledge seems to accept, at least. The creation stories that my ancestors told are all about alliances between places, animals, and families. How those commitments were born, how time, animals, and families began to interact, collaborate, how every now and then something usually was fucked up, and after the erratic behavior, mostly from the side of the man, the interaction continued. The wrongdoer transformed into a steep or a cape, and the harmony hereby restored, aka the erratical or dangerous behavior that could interfere the dynamics of the interaction, petrified. It froze the unwanted motion into stone. Those special places of ancient justice still need to be paid the similar attention as we would interact with the living personalities. A greedy hunter or a too beautiful woman that gets furious when being complimented too much over her looks. Our ancestors that left their marks on the land during the thousands of years of human existence in a certain area by turning into soil generation after generation. We do not have a creation story for following words either. land rights. But we do have a myriad of different practices, policies, systems, how the alliances between the families, animals, and places were governed and managed, and living understanding how those unwritten physical conventions that lasted for millennia are manifested, for example, in place names that our ancestors have left behind, covering all of the area where our cultural inhabitance has taken place. This is a small example of work in process, the living map. We have driven in that map for the area of the 7 Skoltsami Siidas approximately 1,000 place names. And as you can see, the Suenjel names, Muetket names, Nuottijaur names, they haven't been started at all yet. But if we zoom a bit to Njautamseed area, as said, this is just a work in process, but you can see that every pond, every stone, every corner of a curve of a river has a name. All the work that I do is basically concentrating on documenting, verifying and promoting witness statements or testimonies from the people, my people, who still got to live within the fully functioning Siida. Siida is the endemic self-governing system of the Sami. Siida can mean a society, it can mean a place, and it can mean the whole system that is connecting the place and the people. And it has been the Skoltsami that were the last of all Sami Siidas from the area covering over 2,000 kilometers and 4 national states to lose their sovereignty in 1944. And even after the forced evacuation that the Second World War said to us, rudiments of that traditional law are still in practice, especially in the systems governing fishing. With us following the fishing lead you then to the alliances between spawning waters, fish that will come back to spawn only if the water is nurtured and respected by not interfering with her life, and the families who each had and has a duty as the guardian of their own. And who is who then? The act of telling a world to be, the act of saying aloud, the world is spoken out to be, the world is chanted out to be, with the invisible touch of a spoken words, the world is agreed to be as it is, and whose voice it is the land reacts to. What voice does the land listen to? What words she lets herself to be touched by? What words or way of speaking makes her want to throw me out? What words will she pull me closer and let me be with her? The grandfather Lake Sevetti that does not tolerate any noise and hardly stands human at all. The Seittijaur that does not want to have anything to do with a certain family. The Äijäsualla that is only for the men. And the similar less phallic small islands that are only for women. Not mixing this knowledge was the source of good and balanced living and surviving. The late doctor of law, Juhani Virilander, wrote in his investigation for Finnish State in 2001 about the rights of the Skoltsami followingly, and the translation and its errors are solely mine. Quote, "From the beginning, the Skoltsami Sidas have had their own specific areas defined with solid borderlines with neighboring Sidas. Within the Sidas, each household had their own wilderness areas, which continuously belonged to the families. What kind of rights did the Skoltsami have to the Sida lands? Both Danner and Nikkul, iconic researchers known for their vast interest and expertise on Skoltsami Mainot, have seen each Sida as the owner of the land in its particular villages, and all of the households, aka families, that are part of the Sida hold the user right for the commonly owned area, so that every household's possibility for survival was guaranteed. So every household or Skoltsami family and its members have had an inherited and lasting usufructuary right for the Sida land. It seems to be that this is the judgment that the Skoltsami have had themselves about their rights." So wrote Juhani Virilander. So what does this juridical statement mean, and Finland got to do with it? And why it is mandatory for me as an indigenous artist to structure my speech outside of my expertise, meaning quoting at length a South Sami Doctor of Law, Mattias Orén, who has written the creation story of national states in his book, Indigenous Peoples' Status in the International Legal System. And before diving into Orén's thoughts, few of mine. Because of the eradication of the alliances between families, animals, and areas is deeply rooted in our current juridical system, the Finnish law, and what eventually is a quality insensitivity perceiving all around you, the past and the current happenings, but also what is about to come, will be a marginal curiosity reserved only for art and research, rather than being the central principle guiding the everyday life of a society or a civilization. Since a worldview that cannot be rooted into practices, into living bodies, is hanging in air and a cause of distraction and unclear focus, you don't see what is happening around you when your worldview is constantly blocking your view. And it is meaningless, or to be more precise, unsafe to speak about the endemic qualities of communicating with the nature, the land, if you do not address the mechanisms that have for a long period of time interfered with that communication to the point of extinction. In this time of ecological and existential crisis, you cannot cherry-pick indigenous cosmological practices in philosophical or theoretical manner. If we are to go there, we have to undo the damage as well that has been made to those practices, and mostly the lands that are the source of all knowledge. And now to Orén. Quote, "What is meant by peoples and equality under international law? The answer to the first question is important mainly because it explains to what extent indigenous peoples are beneficiaries of the right to self-determination. From a correct understanding of equality follows, inter alia, what property rights indigenous peoples possess over lands and natural resources traditionally used." End quote. In his book, Orén gives detailed and thorough answers to both questions, which I quickly summarize now by quoting him again. During the Renaissance, European explorers intensified the exploration of other continents, thereby increasingly bringing Europe into contact with overseas populations. Thus, at this point, European scholars had both started to develop legal theories and witnessed the world increase. Against this backdrop, it was only natural that these scholars commenced developing theories as to what law should govern Europe's relationships with population on other continents. And in doing so, the early European legal scholars took the position that indigenous peoples' societal structures constitute distinct polities that possessed political rights under international law. For instance, de Vitoria, who was born in 1486, surely the most influential legal scholar in his era, developed a natural law theory that professed that the indigenous peoples of the Americas held autonomous rights handed down to them by God, which the European realms were obligated to respect. In some, early international legal theories acknowledged indigenous peoples as international legal subjects with rights as such. And this recognition was reflected in the fact that during that era, the European realms entered into treaties and other political agreements with indigenous peoples. These treaties were considered to have full international legal status, end quote. As an example of this kind of agreements are the Skoltsami scrolls, gramotas, the verdicts issued by the Russian Tsar. Oldest of preserved agreement dates back to the 15th century. And now back to Oren. That said, indigenous peoples' legal status was not necessarily completely on par with that of the European realms. Only the European model of political and social organization, characterized by exclusive territorial domain and hierarchical centralized authority, qualified as nations proper. Most indigenous people societies were viewed through a European lens, organized in less stringent structures. In other words, it was not the fact that indigenous societies were indigenous that disqualified most of them from the status of nationhood in the mind of European law makers. Rather, it was their perceived loose societal structure that failed to meet the European idea of a nation. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 cemented the realm of the kingdoms in Europe and offered the idea of certain stability in the relations between the nations of the region. At Westphalia, European sovereigns agreed that order was to be guaranteed by sovereigns themselves. Implicit in this notion was that the right of the sovereigns to provide order was inherent. In sum, the theory of justice that took form in Europe in the wake of the Peace of Westphalia and what would become in strength during the following centuries not only rests on the idea that states predate the law and the aggregate populations of states constitute peoples. It presupposes it. It had become self-evident that the world was naturally divided into states, and these states possessed rights precisely by the virtue of being states. In other words, the existing states determined what other polities constitute states. Vattel's theory of the sovereignty fundamentally rejected the idea that polities not organized as European realms could be sovereigns, and consequently, indigenous people societies could not qualify as states. They could not qualify as sovereign states or other polities as they were not organized on the European state model. Rather, according to the Europeans, these societies were organized primarily by tribal and kinship ties, with decentralized political structures, and have enjoyed shared or overlapping spheres of territorial control. End quote. We are still facing and living with the consequences of that foundation masoned in 1648, as the brilliant South Sami lawyer, Doctor of Law Matthias Oren eloquently speaks visible. He has been also the mastermind of the Kirjas versus Sweden case that is still on court. The first round was won by the Kirjas Samiby. In what extent our endemic ways of organizing, our traditional laws, thus the alliances between places, animals, and families, are legal subjects. And legal subjects they must become if they wish to have a say. Professor Rauno Kuokkanen writes about the previous research that has denied colonialism in Sami areas, been approaching and examining the matter with a too narrow and outdated lens, unaware of the new theories that are broadening our understanding of ongoing occupancy. Colonialism is structure, not an event, says Kuokkanen, and fits the concept created by researcher Patrick Wolf to Nordic context. I'm quoting Kuokkanen, who is quoting Wolf, and the translation and its errors again are mine. Quote, settler colonialism differs from slave trade colonialism and genocide. Settler colonialism is an ongoing, contemporary societal structure which aims to eliminate the traditional inhabitants of an area in order to possess the ownership of their lands. Wolf speaks about the logic of elimination. Destroy to replace. We are not necessarily speaking about genocides, rather more subtle means of targeting seizure of lands and her resources. Settled colonialists came here to stay. Invasion is a structure, not an event, quotes Kuokkanen Wolf. Being a target of colonial claims for 700 years herself, has Finland a lot to catch up with the Nordic realms, not to speak about the Russian Empire, in the field of self-awareness of its power position as a colonialist. It is often said that since there is no clearly assimilative or colonial legislation in the Finnish constitution historically, as a different to Norway, there is no solid evidence that any form of colonialism has taken place. Not even when being pointed out that the practices how the Sami were being treated were quite identical in all of the Nordic countries. And it is often forgotten that there has been an act in Finnish constitution which could be read as a shining example of settled colonialism. That is forgotten maybe because Finland lost the area. And the act is the Pechenka Settlement Act from 1925. That act gave the newborn national state of Finland the authority to grant access over Skoltsami-Sida family lands and start building private Finnish farms, roads, factories and mines. If there is a such thing as general pan-Sami world, I would dare to suggest that it is characteristically permeable, flexible, it bends. I am not aware of that many historical or current forms of open, hostile resistance against the sovereignty of national states. The current president of the Sami Parliament of Finland is a Skoltsami chairwoman, or has a Skoltsami chairwoman, whose great-grandmother refused to recognize the new borderline drawn through Suenjeli in 1920. And despite of the protests of her alarmed son, declared that the lake the border penetrated belonged to her family, and she had every right to do as she had always done, fish for her family. So the son needed to get his head straight and listen to what her mother had to say, instead of believing the foolishness of people that don't know the area at all, and sit on a boat and row so she could set her nets as usual. That boat trip ended with Border Patrol opening fire, the grandmother being hit by the bullet, and the profound understanding that times and borderlines had changed, and what she thought to be her world was no longer to be approached and lived in. Skoltsami borderlines were living, flexible, constantly renegotiated. If a family needed more, if somebody needed less, you could always open up the border and agree about the new. And new governing structures that were cemented in a short, very short period of time, functioning with from top to down principle, drove people who considered themselves as self-governing into despair and madness. The massive land theft, replacement of a fully functioning system that included the whole sphere of life into the decision-making, with a Skoltsami Settlement Act that frames us as object of charity, writing our people's existence out of the Finnish history. This catapulted a rough cycle of violence in Skoltsami communities, where the aggression has turned totally inwards. Who ran into a lake to drown? Who shot himself down? Who hanged herself? Who threw her baby into a fireplace and ran away? Blows were given, but not for the conqueror, but for ourselves. When referring to Sida system, what are we actually meaning? Are we speaking about ownership of properties and the right to set borderlines, solid borderlines? Or are we referring to cultural continuations that have their roots in the creation stories from the time when the balance of land, animals, and families, but obviously imperative for survival? What is the mind from whose context we are making decisions about the water and land use management, about the last pockets of ecosystems that are not yet fully exploited? It was a Skoltsami man who showed to a group of geologists the nickel vein. He was asked a particular stone, and that he showed, and afterwards deeply regretted. But it was Finland who established the nickel mine in Petrenka, the very same mine that is still active today, as outdated as some of the colonialism theories are. It was not the Skoltsamis, but Finland who started the secret trade negotiations about nickel deposits with Nazi regime. The industrialization of Petrenka was a humanitarian and ecological catastrophe. Those decisions that were made did not follow Sida laws. They were unbalanced and destructive decisions based on the needs of only some, not for all cycles of life. Eventually, both my people and Finland lost Petrenka, and it was turned into a geopolitical hotspot, a base for mining, nuclear weaponry, and iron borders. We cannot change any bit of that But we are able to examine the practices that are still going on in this current time within the Finnish borders and to ask, is there a way to make things a bit differently, less violently? I will show you another map from a work currently under a process from the project What Form Can Atonement Take, funded by Kone Foundation. You might recognize the lake there in the middle is Inari Lake. We are mapping the cumulative effects of forestry and other industrial land uses for the Sami reindeer herding cooperatives, especially the cooperatives that are in a pine forest area. If I zoom out a bit, you can see that the white area above that is basically above the tree line, and we are not concentrating our work in there, but using different methodologies of land satellite, brown color images, laser scanning images, interviews and photographs, we have mapped in 4 meters accuracy what is the actual status of those forests, the Inari, Skolsami and the North Sami home areas and lands, in order to start discussing about how the future of these areas could look like. This is only a screen capture, so I cannot zoom very closely. The actual database that we are doing is built on vector graphics, so it means that we can zoom very closely. And the color code of that image shows that the darker green, the spot is the taller and thicker the forest. The darker color indicates the density of the forest, and the lighter green indicates younger forest, and as you can imagine, the red dots or the red color indicates logging, and the lilac color indicates the recovering forest or saplings that are growing off. I didn't want to just speak about the harsh issues, so I will show a video clip of another side of the What Form Atonement Can Take project that we are doing in the River Näätämö. I was being so fast, I didn't understand I was so fast, or I had too short of an order. So we can look at this video and then we have a time for discussion. But this
Taten yhtiä soukast leijä ieskuellesellen päikkeleijä.
Takhan leijä koko teko den jytkas leijä ieskuellesellen päikkänä. Tai jäyrimeltä ja päikimeltä halli leijä nyt ja leijätä päikkost. Kosta istas temposia taatli tomeni jälstä. Pasaakin poin voimme saada johte kutja koskas tietenkin kun leheni. Hältiätä jället saavil mähtö toppen perittiä ja jälstä. Mähtö kolle. Tätä kuulumisia jälle Jeres mist naapurin ja toin. Kuuntlemin ja donokman koijemin. Mähtoumu jälleen ja mähtaina.
No täällähän vanna sieka säimelään, mutta jäni nyettelään, mutta haltia puhraajattaa.
Nythän ne oikein tein pytteet, että onpa mieltä, tein vaitsuvaltaksi säivethän tietenkin nyethän lää vaikeampi jo, että losko seuraus. Mutta puhtehan töitse. Färtihän puhti. Mainnehan on kielskuet kunnat. Ja sitten kyllä selm saivausta kostakselle, että kostivakselle. Ei tompanhan ei tiedä, tompanhan lää uummin puhjohtahan sille kostivain ja puhtiitta kosta. Ja teit puhteli jytsä ja vatsami säimmepiitse. Mä koummin leijatak tilat leijatak. Ihan usein. Tunnorskoittoon välillä puhutaan tietän töitä.
No joltaiko käskään seitsopparasta ei taas se perä?
No totta siinä mainsti seitsopparinhan mä ei ole mainstelleet ei pissin. Soeppä aina mähtaukleet ja toppenhan ne uetskuitte tialeet ja töitä.
Jiikost seujat ja
kostaksellet ja kukleet jäisellem sai ja tohakna tästä uetse tialeet.
Joen kun perkati. Katos kalat kaikki. Nyt tää lomppuja.
Joo.
Ja katsotaan lämmöttä hallitusta.
Joo, ja tähän lää nokaan pujiku jortamenta kuutsit makka johtamto.
Ei kun vuosi.
Vuosi?
Joo.
Ja manga puhuähpiä.
Oho.
Joo, se oli semmonen
Tässä
ajatus.
Tuos kaikki sieltä lompoloista. Niistä järvestä.
Ja vedenpinta on niin paljon laskenut, että niillä se uupelu on tullut piiloon.
No, muistatko Risto tällaista kesää, että näin kuiva
Ei,
on?
kyllä minun ei koske.
Mitäs Lati?
Ei, kyllä se on tämä semmonen. Muistan, kun se Anna mummokin sanoi, kun minä hänen kanssaan siellä joella kesät kalastin. Niin lohista puhuttiin, että sitten jos lohi lakkaa olemasta, niin sanoo, niin kuin hän oli sitä kalastajasukua, oli merikalastaja ja lohenkalastaja. Sanoi, että emme me ole sitten enää ihmisiä, jos lohikaan ei tänne tulisi, että mehän kuolemme sen kalan matkassa. Tässä joka vuosi piti se joku kala saada, että silloin hän tuntee itsensä, että eläväksi ja ylväksi, koska minä vielä pystyn sen lohen saamaan. Että sitten lakkaan olemasta, kun en saa enää, en kykene joelle menemään. Niin se sanoi, että sitten ihminen lakkaa olemasta. Päässä päähkäs sanoi, että kiitos muori, että annoit tämän kalan.
So you got to meet my family as well there. There are my parents were there and my great aunt who passed away shortly after the interview that we made with her, and they're my great cousins and relatives that are there because we are such a small nation that everybody is related. So, how do you want to use the rest of the time? We have approximately 40 minutes.
Well, thank you for a very powerful talk, Pauliina. I think you at least changed my day, and what I'll be thinking the rest of the day will be totally different than I was planning to do. But let's start the discussion. Any questions?
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. Actually, my mind is stuck in the part of the colonialism when you quoted this person saying that the colonialism is a structure, not an event. My mind went to the Amazonia right now with Bolsonaro in Brazil, and sometimes I feel that the colonialism with the genocide actually is still an understanding of what is colonialism for many people. I mean, it's an example in Brazil. Like, you say that this is destroying for replacement, like, yes. The colonialism tends to destroy the culture of inhabitants for expanding land property or something like that you say. But it's interesting to see in the example of Brazil, for example, like they are destroying communities, but for which reason? It's I think the word of colonialism is very complex, and it's more complex than we expect. What's your thoughts about these kind of things?
Thank you for your kind words and thank you for your question. Like I said, that when quoting Rauno Kuokkanen, who was quoting Patrick Wolf, and in the whole speech, how I've structured it, I have scaled this to happen in Finland and Finnish context and in a Nordic context. And this concept of settler colonialism that Rauno Kuokkanen has brought to Finnish discussion has been needed before the Nordic denial of any colonial past or present has been so strong, and especially in the Finnish context, it has been said there has been no colonialism here. But as said, that what is happening in Brazil now after the regime changed, it is rather genocide. It is ongoing active genocide that is going on there, and there are forms of slave trade colonialism ongoing in the world, and there are ongoing genocides in the world. And in that context, that when we are trying to figure it out, because we need to name things in order to be able to change them, because in worst, I try to formulate this way. The Nordic countries are being seen the most stable and democratic societies in the whole world. And if we are able to, at least at some level, address that even within this very, very stable society, there is, as Tero Mustonen uses the term, slow violence, slow structural violence that doesn't come to that kind of obvious events of destructions that are ongoing now in Brazil, as you referred to. It doesn't mean it exists. And at the same time, in the international human rights area, Finland and other countries have a strong voice, and they usually use speeches that are criticizing such events that are taking place in Brazil, which is also needed. But in the same time, that if we are only seeing and recognizing, okay, this is colonialism when somebody comes and bulldozes your area and kills everybody and wipes people out, that is colonialism. But the denial of your mother tongues or denial of access for your traditional fishing practices, and even more importantly, the land tending practices, that is not colonialism because nobody is pointing the gun at you. Then we are like being so too black and white and too inaccurate with that discussion. And I do not have the expertise to address all the very violent ongoing attacks to indigenous peoples that are ongoing and happening now globally. But still, I know that the international solidarity, collaboration among the different indigenous peoples and good allies that are intertwined in that, I know that they are very active now with the examples of Mauna Kea, trying to get the sacred Mauna Kea mountain into research station, which is said that it is very important because we need to study climate change. And so that yes, we need to study climate change, but do we have to do that in a manner that we take a whole sacred mountain, and is there no any other means of start to negotiate and try to agree upon that? Is there a way to collaborate? Why do we have to keep on repeating that pattern for centuries over again and again, that there is no negotiation, there is no treaty or agreement, we just do the things and then we have to, another party has to protest. But yeah, I don't know if I answered to your question, but
yes, I agree with you. Actually, the colonialism has different different interpretations of that, and people take what they want. The aim is. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for your thought-provoking presentation. I'm Kerttu, a Finnish person visiting Lapland often, having lived there. I would like to hear your take, your opinion on on one big trend that is happening in Lapland now, namely the increase in tourism that is reaching also naturally the Sami land, the Skolt area. What is your take on that? Are we tourists welcome there? What kind of aspects do you see in this? It's been huge, the growth in tourism in Lapland in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions, Kerttu. For your question, that is a huge topic, very complex and huge issue, and always have to how to stay in the field that I can, because at the same time I don't want to start to rant. This is how to be precise and somehow acknowledging that this is not my expertise, because there are people who, both within the Sami community, the Sami research community, and the Finnish community, that would be more professional to answer to that. But I just try to stick to the very general terms of the issue. After the Second World War, there was very few livelihoods that were promoted in Sami home area in Finnish context. And the biggest one was forestry. That this is an area that is a source of wood that is used for pulp. And the whole kind of infrastructure, meaning the network of roads, the roads and the forest roads, the larger roads that are built in a way that they can sustain the forestry trucks that drive the wood out of the area, and also the tens of thousands of kilometers of forestry roads that are being constructed to those areas, and how it has created when Finland had to pay the war repatriations for Soviet Union, how a total, how would I say, group or a class of workers that worked on the forestry and also in a Tuuloma water dam project in Soviet side moved to that area, and they worked and worked and worked until certain projects or tasks were done, that the Tuuloma dam was constructed and the capacity of the logging had decreased, because you cannot industrially just log and log, because the trees don't grow back in that same pace. At the same time, this discussion, okay, what kind of livelihoods we want to impose at that areas? Is there mining, or what kind of other natural resources we could take? That we can take soil out of that, the soil that is globally now we are running out of soil, running out of sand due to multiple construction work. So, in the same time, when Finland annexed Petchenka to herself, it was the beginning of the modern day tourism, that the road that came to the Barents Sea gave an access to the people who wanted to drive on bus and come and see the nature and see the Arctic Sea and to fish. And that, what started from Petchenka, continued when the Petchenka was lost. So this kind of a Lapin tourism from Lapland within the Finland has been part of Finland ever since, from the beginning of independence. Now, what then has happened after the 1990s, and especially in this new millennia, is the incredible increase of accessibility via airplanes. And that has opened up new groups for travelers to come. And this has also been an active initiative from the municipalities of the region. I know that in the 1990s and early 2000, for instance, the municipality of Inari actively sought connections to China, because they calculated that if even 1% or 0.5% of the China's population would find Lapland to be an interesting place to go on holidays, in numbers being such a huge nation, that would be a huge market. And it took a while, but then it happened that China actually found Lapland. And because we are dealing with the biggest and the wealthiest and with the civilization that invented the writing and the gunpowder and such things, it has not been just that China would come there on vacation and do the same things as the Finns would do in their holidays in Lapland and go picking cloudberries and hike. The last couple of years, I would say, this is very inaccurate, I would say 7 years, maybe 8 years, China has started to invest largely to Lapland. They are buying land, they are investing on new hotels via, how do you say it in English, if somebody is, yes, on the paper it is a Finnish partner who owns the operation, but it's money which is back is Finland. And they now, when this whole Arctic Railway discussion is now going on still, just a couple of weeks ago, it was, because it has been gone back and forth, they said, okay, we are going to build it, no, we are not going to build it, yes, we are going to build it, no, we are not going to build it, but it's been in this last round, it has been said, finally allowed that it's China who is interested in investing to opening of that route. So, in the same time, that it's not only a question that do we want to have visitors or not, because people have been always mobile with their food or with their boats or with some help of animals or with the buses or the railways. People want to see places and visit places and then go back home. It's not about that, but the real question is that what infrastructural changes mass tourism makes to a small community. And I've been born in 1977, and I remember that my home village has been very small and has been some kind of that the summer tourists come and go, but it was very seldom that people would pay an interest that region, and it was relatively poor. In a poor meaning monetary way, that people, mikä on tuloero in English, that the differences in wages, there were no super riches and super poor, but people were quite equally living with quite a little amount of money, but people were doing well because they had their own thing going on. And what the mass tourism has created is this whole new class of great wealth, which creates inequality also internally. It has created whole new villages. For instance, the Saariselkä, maybe some of you have visited there, and maybe you who have visited there, have you been aware of that has been the Skolt-Saami herding lands? That has been, after the forced evacuation, it was a time of unclarity that who is having the say on that land, so the Inari municipality just took it and built it into a tourism center. And it has grown into like it is a bigger center nowadays than Ivalo or Inari, who are the old villages. And it creates like where do we put the sewer waters? Because where, and now they are leading through Ahkojohka to Ivalojohka and then to Lake Inari. So, and the erosion of the lands, because tourists don't want to stay there in hotels, they want to go and hike and see new areas. So it's like increasing all the time the sphere that is used by others than the local citizens, no matter what their ethnicity would be. And in Inari, because this has happened in such a short period of time that we are being here, there nobody wants to come here, or this very small group of people who wants to come there, and all of a sudden this huge amount of people just comes in and goes. And there's also cultural clashes that I know that, for instance, that there are a couple of acquaintances of mine who had people pooing in their yard and saying, okay, I'm sorry, but do you know that in Finland or Samiland you don't come and poo to people's yards? Or there are people peeking out of inside of, coming their yards and peeking inside of windows. Okay, what is going on here? And those are kind of phenomena that, and especially the ones who are living with reindeer herding and who are reindeer herding, you could wake up in the morning and see that there's a small bus, mini bus of a group in your yard taking pictures of the reindeer that you have on your own yard in a fence. Maybe they are herd that you have to somehow tend them, and you go and excuse me, what is going on here? And it unravels that somebody sold them a package of a possibility to come and see how the Sami are tending their reindeer. And of course, the main, I'm answering at length, that the main title of this answer is that it is now, nobody is controlling it, nobody is like governing it, and nobody is making impact assessment in a larger scale, what it means, not to speak about the carbon footprint that comes from the aviation that is bringing the people from far countries to spend a weekend and meet Santa Claus. And I have to tell you one more story quickly, that because of course we have a lot of different kind of stereotypes about the Samis, and a couple of years back my father-in-law asked me jokingly that if I'm related to Santa Claus, and of course being a Sami activist I was very kind of, do you know that we are not midgets and so forth, and started to rant to him that we are not mythical characters, and he was like, okay, just tried to be funny. And then I went to Christmas holidays to visit my parents, and my father's youngest brother came to visit us with his truck, and in his truck's trunk he had one of his great bulls. He had one of these very tame reindeer. And I was like, hi, why are you driving around with your reindeer? And he merrily said that, yeah, that I'm working now. This is my high season, peak season, that I'm working currently in the Saariselkä and many places as a Santa Claus. That I let the kids to see and tap the reindeer, and then I give them the presents and so on. So I felt so bad that, like, hey, should I now call to my father-in-law and say that, yeah, I have to. Now, after checking my sources, Santa Claus is actually my youngest brother of my father. So my apologies, my bad. Yeah.
I have one question. Maybe this is a little bit personal, but as you said, that we live in the age of ecological and existential crisis. So where do you find your strength and power to carry on as an artist?
I do not consider myself of having any strength. It's basically that I think since my childhood I've been depressed, very depressed all my life, and everything that I do is there's no big philosophical or theoretical guideline on that. I just try to keep on going. I just try to make concrete things that would remind me that, hello, you are alive, that I wouldn't be that. But everything I do is trying to remind me that there is life. So basically, my source of strength is depression.
Well, what can I say for that? Thank you for a very honest answer. To sort of wrap up, is there any more questions? No?
Yes.
Oh yeah, there. Hi, Taru.
Thank you for your talk. I have to admit right away, I was not going to ask anything because I felt so embarrassed because I missed a lot of your talk because due to the weather, my train was an hour late. But sort of, I would like to ask you a little bit about what sort of stood out for me from the video that you showed us in the end, was this emphasis on responding to the climate crisis by repairing damages, past damages. And I think that kind of, there's so much talk about how do we adapt or prepare ourselves for the kind of unknown of the climate breakdown, and this sort of futurism or sort of future orientation of how to model, how to kind of, how to sort of move forward or how to be ready, you know, for whatever comes. And I think that was really interesting, that kind of thought of actually looking back, somehow kind of starting from rather than looking forward and with expectations and threat, to kind of look back and, you know, to really kind of start from past damages. So I don't know if you would like to say something about that in relation to how does one work within these environments, the kind of the landscapes, the kind of ecosystems that have been really dramatically impacted, like most of our ecosystems now, by actually not only preparing for the future.
Thank you, Taru. And if you want to, I can give you the papers so you can read what I said, so you don't have to figure it out. And it's so nice to see you. I don't know. Like I said, that I collaborate with scientists, and in the same time, how inhorealistinen like every time, like when we are speaking about like, yes, you should end with a good note, but the fact is what the science is saying, that the big blow from the climate is coming, and what the experts are saying, that Finland is not prepared at all. Finland doesn't have a clue as a state. Finland doesn't have a clue at all as a state, as a society. We are not prepared at all for the scale, what kind of blow is. And what this summer especially has shown, when not only the Greenland permafrost and ice melting, but also the Antarctica permafrost melting, it means that we have reached the turning point, that this whole beautiful idea that we can hinder, we can slow things down, we already, as Taru's juna was late, we are late for that train. The moment has already gone. So it means that we are entering a totally era of really, really big uncertainties. What and how the climate now changes and how the ecosystems are reacting to this huge change. Like Tero Mustonen says, that the era of ice is now gone. And how do we deal with that era of ice being gone? And he also points out the very, very, very important questions. How do we stay sane in this new reality? How do we stay sane seeing the world that we knew is disappearing and something that is coming is alien to us? And why this addressing these past damages is so vital, but is obligatory, because we cannot solve the crisis. We can only stop causing new crises, as in the Brazilian example. Is like it's insane that those fires are not made by nature; those fires are made by man. The Brazilian government is now burning the forests, the lungs, the whole carbon stock in order to make new room for us to eat more beef. And like the only radical thing that we do, that we stop the kind of insanity, but then it's only the nature itself, the nature cycles itself that can start making new connections, how to cope with these changes. And the radicality of the alarmity of the work that we are doing in the river anatomy is that the man-made alternations are so small in scale. It's just like there are no cement put on that river. Boulders were taken away, and now we are taking them back. But even with that small alternation, what we are seeing beneath the surface, under the water, as in the one video clip that there was, that the algae that is growing there and suffocating the Arctic rivers from the inside to the warmth. We don't have magical potions that we just put there, and we don't have a kind of a cooling systems when the Arctic rivers start to boil. When the temperature day in, day out of the Arctic rivers is over plus 24 degrees for periods of weeks in time because of the climate change. And it will kill species. It will take Arctic species into extinction. That is for sure. But in the same time, it would be insane not to try to help the river with the best knowledge that we have to help adapt that some of the species will survive. There are winner species and there are loser species. And it would be insane to say that, okay, that since pike is coming over, let's just say bye-bye to Arctic char, maybe have a fishery in some man-made cave, so the people who like Arctic char's red, delicious meat can still have it on their plate. So, the urgency of, first of all, ending the acts that are destroying the natural ecosystems, and secondly, restoring the areas that have already been human impacted. It's like we all should be doing that right away. And then it's not a question of who has the traditional ownership and who has the best knowledge. And what I spoke today is like just showing an example that just one small example from my own tribe, what we are trying to do and based on what knowledge that is. But if you don't know all the songs and creation stories of a particular place, it's fine. You just speak with the locals, you speak with the people who are still active in that area. You get the science, you get the local people, you get whoever they're around, and then you start doing it. And it's not only because it would be the right thing to do, but it's a matter of our survival. And I'm sorry that I end my speech with such an apocalyptic note, but you asked. I was ending with a joke. Sorry.
I try to have one positive note at the end before the lunch. maybe there is a room for collaboration for all of us, as you said. Thank you.